In the garden. Behold him in the evening tide of life, but unperceived degrees he wears away. Yet, like the sun, seems larger at his setting. Jamshed Nusarwanji, the old Parsi friend who was so fond of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, sought him one day in the garden of Government House and found him dozing on a seat. The Qaid looked up and said, I am so tired, Jamshed, so tired. This was early in February 1948, 6 months after Jinnah had flown in to claim his realm. He had always been too busy to sit out of doors and doze like this. When he owned his first garden on Malabir Hill in Bombay, in the early days of his political career, he would hurry along the paths in the morning, complaining if the flowers were mixed. Like a jungle, he would say. He liked phlox and petunias in nice straight lines, but he never paused to pick a flower, and seldom sat in idleness to enjoy the view. The Kayat's habits changed during this last year of his life. He would sometimes sit in the garden of Government House and permit what was a novelty to him moments of contemplation in the shade, followed by a short nap. Sometimes, while walking through the garden, he would bend down and pick a carnation for his coat. One morning, also in February, Mr. Ian Stevens went to see the Qaid. He wrote afterwards, at that time, though no one realized it, the creator of Pakistan was dying, his lungs riddled with the unsuspected tuberculosis which a few months later killed him. The Qaid had kept a secret, the warning of the Bombay doctors, 3.5 years before. Mr. Stevens wrote, Mr. Jinnah looked better than when I had seen him shortly before partition, and I said so. During an unexpectedly long interview, 70 minutes, which baffled his secretaries. He ranged widely over the course of Indo Pakistani affairs during the previous 7 months. A dramatic, fascinating story as told by such a man. At the end, the kite said, Yes, Mr. Stevens, thank you. I feel better. I am better. They say I have been ill. I have not. I know I get tired. The thin, handsome lips moved with the restrained, characteristic smile. As Kadazam went on, It is natural that I should. I am not young. I have responsibilities. So when I get tired, Mr. Stevens, I rest. It is simple. I tell my doctors to go away. I know what to do. I will not have them fussing. They might annoy me. No, I was not ill at all. Each man is 100 men within himself, so that he presents a different facet to almost every being he meets. The many who had known Jinnah disagreed as to his hardness of heart, his solitariness, and his charm. But from the beginning to the end, no one ever doubted his integrity. Sir Stafford Cripps, who first knew him in the early 1930s, regarded him as a man of the highest probity and honor, difficult to negotiate with for the very reason that he was so determined in his purpose. Field Marshal Sir Claude Auchincheck said of Jinnah, I admired him, his tenacity and tremendous personality, his inexorable determination. Lord Wavell, with whom Mr. Jinnah had failed in friendship, sighed when he was asked for his opinion and said he was a very difficult man to deal with. Those who worked near the Qaid, the younger Pakistanis who served him after partition, were devoted but intimidated. One of his secretaries has said, even Jinnah's warmth was calculated. Another has said, Qaidism was very old and tired when I went to him. All my feelings were subdued into awe of him. But there were many endearing qualities. Sometimes he would be sharp tempered and would wave me away when I spoke to him. After a few minutes, he would ring and I would go into him. Then came kindness and his apology. I am old and weak and sometimes I am impatient. I hope you will forgive my bad manners. But this gentleness was seldom revealed. A member of Lord Mountbatten's staff is reported to have described the Qaid as the rudest man east of Suez. When this story was told to Mrs. Dina Wadia, the Qaid's daughter, she answered, My father was arrogant, but never rude. If you examine each incident in which he is accused of rudeness, you will find that the other person was clumsily rude first. It was true that Qaid-e-Azam had always been quick with reproof. There is a story of Mr. Ramsay MacDonald saying to him, Mr. Jinnah, you know that we are hoping to grant self-government to India, and I shall need men to be governors of provinces. And Jinnah's answer, Mr. MacDonald, are you trying to bribe me? And he could reprimand those who admired him most. Once in London, when Mr. Jinnah was about to take off by air for Bombay, an old, devout Muslim appeared on the aerodrome with the one wish that he might shake the Qaid's hand. He had hurried all the way from the east end of London in a taxicab, which had cost him several pounds. Someone led the disciple to Jinnah and told him the story of the cab. The Qaid shook the old man's hand, but he said, in a scolding voice, Oh, you Muslims are so extravagant. The Qaid rejected all adulation when it was emotional. He went one day to a small town where he was welcomed by a big procession of peasants. They cried out, Maulana Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Zindabad. Maulana is a religious title, and this the Qaid resented. He halted the procession, pointed his finger at the crowd, and said, Stop calling me Maulana. I am not your religious leader. I am your political leader. Call me Mr. Jinnah or Muhammad Ali Jinnah. No more of that Maulana. Do you understand me? The people were amazed. They had thought to honor him. They became silent and he drove on. Women stirred qualities in the Qaid that give a different and gentler view. There is a happy story told of a young girl who was introduced to him some time before partition. She confessed to an older woman later that she had fallen in love with Mr. Jinnah's hands, the hands he cared for and used so effectively. The woman repeated the story to the Qaid and he was amused. Next day, when he went to the races, he found that he was sitting next to his young admirer. So he said to her mischievously, Now, young lady, don't keep looking at my hands. Older woman liked his distinguished looks and the courtly manner he could affect in drawing rooms. Lady Wivel said of him, Mr. Jinnah was one of the handsomest men I have ever seen. He combined the clear cut, almost Grecian features of the West with Oriental grace and movement. Begum Liaquat Ali Khan has said, The first time I saw Jinnah, he captured my heart. He gave the impression of being haughty and conceited, but once you came to know him, he was deeply human. Perhaps Mrs. Naidu's estimate of Jinnah, made when he was still in his 30s, remains the wisest of all. She wrote, A casual pen might surely find it easier to describe his limitations than to define his virtues. His are none of the versatile talents that make so many of his contemporaries justly famed beyond the accepted circle of their daily labors. Not his the gracious gifts of mellow scholarship or rich adventure or radiant conversation, not his the burning passion of philanthropy or religious reform. Indeed, by his sequestered taste and temperament, Muhammad Ali Jinnah is essentially a solitary man with a large political following, but few intimate friends. And outside the twin spheres of law and politics, he has few resources and few accomplishments. But the true criterion of his greatness lies not in the range and variety of his knowledge and experience, but in the faultless perception and flawless refinement of his subtle mind and spirit, not in a diversity of aims and the challenge of a towering personality, but rather in a lofty singleness and sincerity of purpose and the lasting charm of a character animated by a brave conception of duty and an austere and lovely code of private honor and public integrity. Of what did Muhammad Ali Jinnah think as he dozed in the garden? Mrs. Naidu had written of his singleness and sincerity of purpose, and of his lovely code of private honor and public integrity. But she had also regretted his lack of the gracious gifts of mellow scholarship. It was true that he never seemed to see himself in relation to history. Even when he was at the age when most old men enjoy their memories, he spared little time for such pleasures. He never even returned to the house in Newman Road where he had been born, 71 years before. He would have been a proud sensation for any man to walk from the splendors of Government House, the symbol of achievement, back to his humble birthplace to look up at the two first floors room and say, There I began, and I have made a nation. But for Jinnah, yesterday was done with and a dead thing.